The wind howled down the tracks like it was chasing ghosts. Dust whipped across the silent station platform, stinging cheeks and blinding eyes. The sun, harsh and pitiless, hung high above the open plains, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward nowhere. No one moved. A few townsfolk loitered under the shade of the general store awning. Pretending not to see her Dot, she stood near the edge of the platform, her dress torn at the hem, stained with dried blood and grit. A baby clung to her neck, too small to protest, too exhausted to cry anymore. The woman's face was half hidden beneath the rim of a faded bonnet, but one eye was swollen shut, and her bottom lip was split and crusted. Still she stood, unmoving, unspoken for, unwelcome. The train that brought her had long vanished in a trail of steam and screeching metal. No one had asked her name. No one had offered help. She was just another bruised stranger, abandoned by the tracks. And in this part of the West, mercy was a currency most folks didn't carry anymore. A child whimpered softly, a sound so fragile. It barely stirred the dry air. She shifted her weight, knees trembling. She hadn't eaten in 2 days, hadn't slept in longer. Her husband's last words still echoed in her ears, his threats, promises of what he'd do if she ever ran. Again, she ran anyway. With the baby tucked beneath her shawl, she had climbed aboard a freight car during the midnight lull. Her escape was a miracle, but miracles don't last. Not out here. A creak of leather broke the silence. A townsfolk turned, ever so slightly, as the sound of hooves on dirt drew closer. A rider approached from the northern trail, dust coiling around the legs of a tall, weather-beaten Mustang. The man astride the horse was lean, sunburned, his long duster trailing like a shadow behind him. A wide-brimmed hat shaded his face, but the way he sat in the saddle said everything: quiet strength, solitude, and danger wrapped in a worn coat and silence. Silas McGraw. Some said he used to be a gunslinger. Others claimed he was just a rancher with too many ghosts and not enough whiskey. He spoke little, laughed never, and trusted no one. Since his wife had died 6 winters back bleeding out in the barn, with no midwife to call, he hadn't opened his door to anyone. He dismounted without a word, tying his reins loosely to the hitch post near the blacksmith's. The townsfolk nodded in with a mix of respect and distance. Silas returned nothing but a glance. Then he saw her knees, buckled as if fate had heard her name and called her home. The baby slid halfway down her shoulder. She caught him with the last of her strength. And then slowly, like a tree giving into time, she collapsed. Silas didn't move at first. He just stared, the way her arm curled instinctively around the baby, even as her face hit the ground. The way the townsfolk looked away. A dog barked in the distance. The wind kept howling. He took 3 slow steps toward her, boots crunching over gravel, spurs singing softly. She breathin'? Someone muttered from behind. Silas knelt. Her pulse was faint, but there. The baby was hot to the touch, fevered. And yet its small eyes met his with a glimmer of something terrifying and pure need. Maybe trust. Maybe just hunger. He looked up. Anyone got water? The silence was answer enough. So Silas McGraw did something he hadn't done since the day his wife was buried. He lifted a stranger into his arms. She weighed next to nothing, bones wrapped in bruises and rags. Her breath was shallow and fast. The baby nestled between them, still and silent, as if the world had finally run out of things to take from him. He laid her gently across the back of his Mustang, securing her with an old blanket. She stirred once, eyes fluttering, but she didn't speak. Maybe she didn't have words left. Maybe the pain had stolen even that. What you gonna do with her? The storekeeper asked, half curious, half judging. Take her home. Silas said simply, trouble's probably following her. Trouble don't scare me. He swung into the saddle behind her, wrapping one arm around both woman and child, steadying them. His other hand held the reins. And just like that, they rode out of town. No one stopped them. No one offered good. Luck. The wind followed. His ranch sat 10 miles west, nestled between two low hills and guarded by a fence that hadn't seen repairs in 3 years. The fields lay untended. The barn sagged. The house itself, once bright with curtains and laughter, now stood bare, gray, and silent, like a man waiting to be buried. He laid her down on the bed, his bed, then poured a pail of water from the pump and started wiping the dirt from her face. She flinched when the cloth touched her skin, but didn't wake. Easy, he muttered. Ain't no one gonna hurt you now, the baby whimpered. Silas glanced down and saw the little one's cheeks were flushed with heat. He rummaged through the pantry, found a tin of goat milk, warmed it over the stove, and fed the child slowly with a spoon. The baby suckled greedily, too young to question kindness. When the woman finally opened her eyes, it was evening. Golden. Light poured through the window, catching on the dust floating in the air. She blinked, dazed, then tensed as if bracing for a blow. Where am I? Her voice was a rasp. Where's my son? He's right here, Silas said, nodding toward the cradle he'd carved years ago. Fed him what I had. She sat up. Too fast, winced. Don't touch me, she whispered, though her body sagged with weakness. Please, I ain't gonna hurt you. They always say that, she said, eyes narrowing. Silas didn't argue. He poured her a cup of water and left it beside the bed. Then he walked to the doorway and leaned against it, arms folded, boots dusty, eyes distant. What's your name? He asked after a while. She hesitated. Clara. Your boy, Eli? You running from someone, Clara? She didn't answer, but her hand drifted to a scar on her collarbone, and the silence between them thickened with understanding. I've got a spare room, he said after a while. You can stay until you get your feet under you. Clara's eyes filled, but she blinked the tears back. Why? He looked at her, then at the child, then out the window toward the setting sun. Because once someone needed help, and I wasn't there in time. That night, the cabin creaked with unfamiliar weight. Clara lay in the bed, the baby asleep on her chest. Silas sat near the hearth, oil lamp flickering, rifle across his knees. He hadn't meant to take anyone in, hadn't planned for the storm of memories that came with her, bruises and silence. But there was something about the way she held the child, the way she hadn't begged, hadn't pleaded, just stood there waiting to fall. Outside, the coyotes howled. Silas stared into the flames and muttered, almost to himself, what the hell have I done? And yet, deep down below the ache and the grief and the years of silence, something stirred. Not pity, not guilt, something closer to hope. And hope, in these parts, was a dangerous thing. He stayed awake long after the fire burned low, listening to the wind scratch against the window. There were tracks leading back from that station, tracks she followed to get here, but it was the ones she left behind that would matter most. The cabin smelled of ash, old wood, and something unfamiliar hope, perhaps. Clara lay stiff in the narrow bed, every part of her aching, listening to the unfamiliar creaks of the house and the soft rhythm of Eli's breathing beside her. Morning. Light pushed in through the curtainless window. Her eyes darted toward it, measuring her chances. Her thoughts were already at the door, at the horse outside, at whatever distance she might be able to put between herself and Silas McGraw, before he changed his mind and turned cruel. She sat up slowly, the soreness in her ribs making her wince. Eli stirred, but didn't wake. The blanket covering them smelled of cedar and tobacco. Too clean, too strange. Her bare feet hit the floor, and the cold bit into her toes. She scanned the room for her dress, spotted it folded neatly on the chair. Someone had washed the blood from it. Her face flushed with discomfort. Her fists clenched. She didn't owe anyone anything, especially not a man. Silas sat outside on the porch, his coffee steaming beside him, his eyes on the plains. He hadn't slept. The rifle rested across his lap, not because he expected trouble, but because it was habit. Years alone do that to a man. He hadn't spoken a word since helping Clara up the night before. Didn't know what to say now. But he heard her bare footsteps inside, heard the floorboards moan beneath her light weight. He waited till Clara opened the door, Eli swaddled in one arm, her dress hanging loose on her thin frame. Her eyes flicked. Over him, uncertain. "You're up," Silas said, without turning. "I didn't ask you to take me in," she replied. "You didn't have to." "I don't need your charity." Silas finally looked at her. The bruises on her face were a darker purple today. Her cheekbones swollen, lip cracked again from the cold night air. Still, she stood with pride. "A woman trying not to bend. This ain't charity," he said. "This is a roof and four walls until you can figure things out." Clara stepped onto a porch, wary but determined. "And what do you want in return?" Silas stared at the horizon, his voice low. "Just don't shoot me in my sleep." She blinked, unsure if he was joking. A moment passed. Then she gave the faintest exhale. Could have been a laugh, could have been disbelief. "I don't know how to thank you," she said at last, her voice quieter. "You don't," Silas replied, "but there's coffee if you want it." The morning passed in awkward silences and half-glances. Clara tried to make herself useful, though each step felt like treading ice. She wiped the counter, checked the baby, studied the room as if memorizing it for an escape she still half intended to make. Silas fed the chickens, chopped wood. His eyes drifted to the house more than once, as if checking to see if she was still there. Every time she hadn't run yet, he seemed surprised. At midday, Clara stood at the stove, her hands trembling slightly as she stirred a pot of beans. Silas watched from the doorway, unsure whether to say something or walk away. She looked smaller than she had in the sunlight. The pot hissed. "How'd you end up with a man like him?" Silas asked, not unkindly. Clara didn't turn. Her voice came after a long pause. "Because I thought I deserved someone worse." Silas didn't reply. There were things a man learned to carry quiet. Shame was one of them. "He was charming once," she added, stirring slower. "Promised me land, a safe place. And then he started drinking. Then came the fists. Then Eli. After that, there was no leaving." Silas let the words hang in the air like dust. "I ran the night he hit Eli," she said softly. "That's the only thing that scared me worse than dying him, laying a hand on that baby." Silas nodded once, then took the pot from her gently and set it down. "You did right." Clara's hands gripped the edge of the table. "I still see him. In my sleep, I hear the door slam. I hear him breathing behind me. It doesn't go away." "No." Silas said, "It don't, but it gets quieter." She turned toward him. "What about you? What broke you so quiet?" Silas looked down at his hands, the calluses, the burn scar across his knuckles, the half-moon nail that never grew back right. He didn't answer right away. "My wife died in that room," he finally said. "Giving birth. I didn't know what to do. Snow was too thick to fetch help. She screamed all night. Baby never made it." Clara said nothing. "I never buried her right," he added. "Just laid her in the frozen ground. I couldn't watch." The wind moaned against the house. Somewhere, a horse snorted from the barn. They sat at the table in silence and ate. The baby laughed once, smearing beans across his chin. Clara wiped his mouth and kissed the top of his head. Silas caught the way she looked at the child, like he was both burden and miracle. He thought about what it would be like to have that. Again, then shoved the thought away. That afternoon, Clara found the courage to walk the edge of the property. She needed to know the land, where the fence lines ended, how close the woods pressed in. Silas followed from a distance, not intruding, but not trusting the wilderness to behave. Near the south fence, Clara stopped. The wind tugged at her dress. She pointed at the hills. "He'll come looking, you know." "I figured," Silas said, "and he won't stop until he finds me." "He'll find me first." Clara looked at him then, truly looked. The rifle slung across his shoulder, the stillness in his face, the eyes that had known loss but didn't flinch anymore. "You'd fight him?" she asked, half challenging, half curious. "I'd kill him," Silas said plainly. Her breath caught. Not in fear, but something else. Maybe it was relief. Maybe it was mourning for the part of her that still wanted someone to protect her. Even after all she'd endured, they returned to the cabin as dusk bled across the sky. Clara lit a lantern, hands steadier now. Eli gurgled happily on the floor, chewing the corner of a blanket. Silas tended to the fire. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. Later, Clara found a small wooden box under the bed. Inside were old letters, yellowed and faded. A woman's handwriting. Elegant, looping. She didn't read them. Just touched them lightly before closing the lid and setting it back with reverence. A baby cried out in his sleep. Clara shushed. Him, rocking slowly, humming a lullaby without words. Silas sat on the porch, smoking a pipe, eyes on the stars. The air had turned colder. Autumn was on its last breath. Winter would come soon, heavy and indifferent. Inside, Clara watched the flame flicker. For the first time in months, maybe years, she didn't feel hunted. She didn't feel quite safe either, but she felt seen. That was something. She walked to the doorway, cradling Eli. Silas glanced back, his pipe glowing in the dark. "Thank you," she said, just above a whisper. He nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon. "You ain't a stranger anymore." She stepped outside, joining him. Together, they listened to the silence stretch out across the plains, both of them wondering what would come next, but not running from it. Not tonight. The storm didn't announce itself with thunder or a sudden drop in temperature. It crept in quietly, like a shadow at noon, unnoticed until it was already wrapped around the hills. Silas had seen enough seasons out on the prairie to know when the wind shifted just wrong, too still, too dry. He paused while stacking hay bales outside the barn, eyes narrowed, sensing a change that had nothing to do with weather. Inside the house, Clara fed Eli a chunk of mashed apple from a tin. He sat upright now, stronger than before, his cheeks fuller, his eyes more curious. His small hand clutched at her skirt whenever she stepped away, like he'd finally decided she wasn't going anywhere and now couldn't bear to let her stray even a few feet. She hummed softly as she worked, unaware of the heavy weight creeping up Silas's spine outside. That morning it started quiet, peaceful even. Clara had baked flatbread while Silas mended a broken post by the well. The kind of domestic rhythm that doesn't announce itself as precious until it's been broken. But the signs were there. Silas had found boot tracks near the creek, fresh ones, too heavy for a ranch hand or stray hunter. He hadn't told Clara. Not yet. He wasn't sure if it would turn out to be paranoia or proof. But deep down, he knew. Some men don't stop hunting, especially when they believe what they're owed still breathes. Later that evening, when the first of the black clouds rolled over the ridgeline, Clara stood at the door, her arms folded around Eli, and frowned. "Looks rough," she said quietly. Silas glanced at the horizon. We'll bring the animals in, board the windows. You think it's just wind? No, he said simply. But we'll act like it is until we're sure. They worked. In silence. Clara helped him secure the barn while Eli napped, and she moved with calm purpose, her instincts tuned now to urgency and survival. She didn't ask questions, didn't beg reassurance. She knew something was wrong, just by the way Silas held the hammer in his fist, as if he expected to need it for more than nails by nightfall. Rain pelted the roof like pebbles from a thrown hand. The fire crackled in the hearth, and Silas sat, with the rifle across his lap, its steel barrel catching flashes of orange light. Clara read aloud from a Bible she found on a crooked shelf, her voice steady but hollow. Eli slept between them on a quilt, oblivious. Then the knock came. 3 slow, deliberate thuds. Silas stood instantly. Clara froze, her eyes jumping to this door. Eli stirred, sensing the tension in the air, but didn't cry. No one ever knocked on that door. Not at night. Not in a storm. Silas moved to the window and peeled back the edge of the curtain. A man stood in the downpour, soaked to the bone, one arm limp at his side. His face was obscured by the rain and his hat, but his stance, the tilt of his head, the relaxed arrogance triggered something dark and immediate in Silas's gut. He turned back to Clara. Take the boy. Get upstairs. Quiet. Clara didn't argue. She lifted Eli and pressed him close, disappearing into the shadows without another word. The floor creaked once as she stepped on the stairs, then fell silent. Silas opened the door slowly, the rifle hidden just behind the frame. Evening, the man said, his voice slurred from cold or drink or both. Fine night for a reunion. The lantern light illuminated his face, split lip, scar across the brow, one eye swollen and red. But the smile was what made Silas want to put a bullet between his eyes. You lost? Silas asked. The man's smile widened. I ain't here for directions. Another figure emerged behind him, lean, twitchy, carrying a sawed-off tucked into his belt. A second pair of boots shifted in the dark. 3 of them. Maybe more waiting in the trees. She in there? The man asked, stepping closer. My wife, Clara, took my boy too, I reckon. Shouldn't have done that. Silas said nothing. You shelterin' her? The man said, voice louder now. That makes you a thief, makes you a liar, makes you dead. Silas moved first. The door slammed shut just as the first shot rang out. Wood splintered behind him. Eli cried upstairs. Clara muffled the sound quickly, trying to keep still. Silas rolled to the side, grabbing the rifle and aiming low. Another shot. The window shattered. Rain and glass spilled across the floor. He fired back. The shot hit the twitchy one in the leg. Silas heard the scream, heard the thud of a body hitting wet earth. Then came footsteps fast, heavy, circling the cabin. Clara crouched at the top of the stairs. Eli pressed to her chest, heart thundering. She fought the urge to run to Silas, to help. But she knew better. She wasn't the same woman who had fled through brush and darkness weeks ago. She had Eli now, and a reason to stand still. Below, Silas moved like a man who knew death's shape. Calm, measured, deadly. Another shot ripped through the front wall. He ducked, fired twice. A third man yelped, fled. Then silence deeper than the storm fell. Clara listened, her ears ringing. Footsteps returned, slow, determined. Silas gritted his teeth, reloading with hands that moved from memory. The door burst open. The outlaw stepped inside, wild-eyed, soaked through, blood dripping from his side. He held a revolver out in front of him, like a compass needle. Where is she? Silas stepped forward. Gone. Wrong answer. He fired. The bullet grazed Silas's shoulder, spinning him back. Pain lit his nerves like lightning, but he didn't drop the rifle. He lunged out. They collided in the middle of the room, fists, boots, curses flying. The outlaw smashed a chair into Silas's side. Silas responded with the butt of the rifle to the man's jaw. Blood sprayed the fireplace bricks. Clara couldn't stay hidden. She set Eli down in the cradle, kissed his head once, then descended the stairs. The outlaw saw her. "Clara," he breathed, smiling through broken teeth. "You gonna come home?" "Now? No," she said clearly. "I'm done running." He raised the gun. Silas shouted, "Down!" Too late. The gun fired, but the shot didn't hit her. The outlaw staggered back, blinking in disbelief. A red stain bloomed across his chest. Clara held the revolver Silas had given her a week before. Her hands didn't shake. Her aim didn't falter. Smoke drifted from the barrel as if the house itself exhaled. The outlaw fell to his knees, then to the floor, his eyes wide, confused. Rain pounded the roof. Lightning flashed. Then it was over. Clara dropped the gun, knelt beside Eli, scooped him up as he wailed. Her body shook, not from fear but release. Silas stood over the dead man, breathing hard, blood running down his arm, eyes locked on her. "You all right?" he asked hoarsely. Clara nodded. "You?" He gave a tired smile. Still standing. Together, they dragged the body out. Silas buried him behind the barn without a prayer. The other two had fled into the night. They wouldn't be back. The storm had passed, but the air still stank of blood and fire. Inside, the house was a mess. Glass, mud, broken furniture. But there was breath in their lungs, and a child still safe. Clara cleaned Silas's wound in the kitchen. He winced, but didn't complain. She tore strips from a clean sheet and wrapped his arm gently. "You could have let him kill me," she said quietly. Silas looked at her. "So could you." They shared a silence thick with understanding. "You sure you want us here?" she asked. Not as a plea, but as a fact that needed confirming. Silas nodded. "You're already here." She reached up, kissed his cheek, and let her hand linger just long enough for the warmth to sink in. Upstairs, Eli's cries faded into soft sighs. They sat together by the fire until dawn, the storm outside finally losing its voice. The storm they hadn't seen coming was behind them now. But what stood ahead, what lingered between them, was something quieter. Something stronger, and neither of them would run from it. The first thaw came softly, almost like an apology. Snow trickled from the hills into Silas's pasture, waking the earth with a slow, steady pulse. Crocuses pushed up through the frozen dirt, timid but determined. The air still held a bite, but the wind had changed, less cruel, less hollow. Inside the cabin, everything felt warmer. Not because the stove burned brighter, but because something in the silence had shifted. It no longer felt like absence. It felt like peace. Clara opened the shutters one morning and let the sunlight pour in. She stood barefoot on the wood floor. Eli balanced on her hip and watched as the plains beyond the cabin turned from gray to green. Her hair was longer now, free of the bonnet, tied loosely with a red ribbon Silas had bought from town without saying a word. She had color in her. Cheeks, not from bruises, but from living. Silas stood near the corral, hammering new planks into place. He paused when he saw her in the window, smiled softly, and tipped his hat. She smiled back, and it wasn't forced, not guarded. It was real. Weeks had passed since the gunfire and blood, but neither of them spoke about that night. The grave behind. The barn had settled, the ground above it flattened by snow and rain. The memory remained, yes, but it no longer ruled them. Clara had killed a man to protect her son. Silas had fought for people he barely knew, and now they were no longer strangers. They had become a kind of family, though neither of them dared name it. Silas worked the land with a new rhythm. He built a small chicken coop beside the garden, repaired the roof, planted corn in the thawed soil. Clara tended the garden, washed the clothes, and taught Eli to walk by coaxing him across the cabin floor with an apple slice. He fell often, but always laughed. The boy's laugh was a sound that filled every empty place in Silas's chest. Sometimes, in the middle of a chore, he'd stop just to listen. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the sky, Clara joined. Silas by the porch rail. Eli toddled between them, chasing a moth he'd never catch. The dog they'd taken in a mutt, with one ear and a lopsided tail, watched over the child like a hired hand. "I never thought I'd see peace again," Clara said quietly. Silas didn't look at her, but his jaw tightened. "I didn't think. I deserved it. You do, after what I let happen to my wife. Our baby? You are alone. You did what you could. I did too little. You gave a stranger a second chance," she said, her voice firmer. "That means more than you know." Silas finally turned to her, eyes shadowed with something heavy and unspoken. "I ain't good with words. I don't need pretty words." He hesitated, then reached out slowly, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. She didn't flinch. She leaned into his hand. His thumb rested just below her eye, where the bruise had long faded. "I thought I'd buried my heart," he murmured. "You didn't," she whispered. "You just kept it safe." He kissed her then, with the same care he used to cradle Eli. When the baby cried at night, it wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was something steadier earned. Her hand rested on his chest, feeling the heartbeat that had gone quiet for too many years. They didn't speak of love. They lived it, in the way she brewed his coffee before dawn, just the way he liked it. In the way he repaired her sewing needle when it snapped. And how they read to Eli at night, one voice following the other, as if they'd always been a pair. Then, one afternoon, as spring took hold of the valley, Silas saddled his horse and rode. To town. He returned with a crate of books, a spool of lace, and a gold ring tucked into his vest pocket. He didn't present it with a speech or a grand gesture. He simply handed it to Clara while she rocked Eli on the porch. "I don't know much about weddings," he said, scratching his neck. She opened the small box and stared at the band. Her eyes glistened. "But I know about home," he added. "And I know you and that boy. You're mine now, if you'll have me." Clara said nothing at first. She stood, placed the ring gently back into the box, then stepped toward him and wrapped her arms around his middle. "I already said yes," she whispered into his chest. The ceremony was held in a small chapel just over the ridge. The preacher was an old man with trembling hands and no congregation to speak of. Clara wore a dress made from curtains and lace. Silas wore his best shirt, still smelling faintly of cedar smoke. Eli watched from the front pew, giggling when Clara bent down to kiss his forehead after saying her vows. Afterward, the three of them returned to the cabin. A neighbor had sent over a pie. Someone left a bouquet of wildflowers on the porch. No name, no note. Just kindness, anonymous and quiet. That night, Clara leaned against Silas as the fire flickered low. "Do you still see her?" she asked softly. He didn't need to ask who she meant. "Sometimes," he said. "But it's different now." "How?" "I see her smiling, and I think, maybe she sent you." Clara kissed his shoulder. "Then I'll be sure to thank her someday." The weeks turned to months. The corn grew tall. The dog grew fat. Eli said his first word, "Mama," and took to dragging a wooden spoon wherever he went. Silas built a swing from rope and pine wood, and hung it from the old tree in the front. Yard, Clara laughed more. Silas slept better. They weren't perfect. Sometimes he grew quiet for too long. Sometimes she startled at loud noises or flinched when she dropped something. But they knew each other's wounds now. They respected them. They helped each other carry the weight, one piece at a time. Late one summer evening, Silas sat outside watching fireflies blink across the pasture. Clara came up behind him and wrapped her arms around his shoulders. "You still afraid?" she asked. Dottie thought about it. "Yeah," he said, "but not of the same things. Me neither." He took her hand and kissed her knuckles. "You made me whole again." Clara smiled against his neck. "No, Silas, you were always whole. You just forgot how to feel it." A soft breeze rustled the leaves. The stars blinked into view one by one. In the cradle beside the door, Eli snored lightly, his little chest rising and falling with a rhythm that matched the calm in Silas's chest. He looked around the land, this house, these walls, this woman and child, and understood something for the first time. He hadn't rescued them. They'd rescued him, Dot, and for the first time in a long, lonesome life, Silas McGraw didn't just exist. He belonged.